Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Analysing Anfield, your tactics and analytics podcast, courtesy of the Blood Red channel. I'm joined by David Hughes as always. Dave, any new updates this week, or are you sound as usual?
Yeah, it sounds as usual, mate. Short and sweet. All is fine in my camp. Hopefully it is in yours.
All is fine, but you are injured this week alongside me.
Yeah, I am actually, yeah. Yeah, so it must be contagious, but yeah, no, I picked up a little knock playing last week. Hopefully it's not too serious. I don't know if people care to know that, but they know anyway.
Listen, this is important, mate. First team is here.
Mm.
But yeah, so today's episode, we're going to stick with a bit of a New Year theme. Obviously, long-term listeners to the show will know how Analysing Anfield usually works. We are usually very much game-focused, reviewing and previewing games. But I think just because we've been gone for so long, just a bit of a new approach for the new year, I suppose, rather than looking at specific games and going about it very methodically. We're going to be a bit more scattergun, maybe, with our talking points and look at general overview topics, overriding themes for each episode, see how we go with it. If you want us to change back, do let us know. But I think, yeah, we're just going to touch upon talking points on the Liverpool scene, as we have been doing for the past few episodes. So, first up this week, Dave, I was going to mention this last week because it was kind of last week's news, but we didn't really have time. But Liverpool got linked with Aurélien Tchouaméni in the Athletic, I think it was, and it was David Ornstein, so pretty credible. I think he was the first onto Liverpool's links with Canate, and obviously that ended up coming through. You think he is a player that we've mentioned, but were you surprised at that one? What are your thoughts?
I can't remember. Yeah, I can't remember if we mentioned him or if somebody asked us to speak about him. It was one of the two. Was I surprised? I don't know. The reason I say I wouldn't be surprised is because there's a lot of hype around the player, and it's kind of understandable as to why. He's only 21. Really impressive first season in Liga and last year. I was actually looking to the numbers, and he played something like 36 times, which we think for what he would have been 19-20 that season. That's quite impressive for a top French side as well. And, in terms of a profile, we just look at it from a profile point of view as opposed to necessarily Liverpool for a second. He looks really good. He's got a really good physical profile. He's seems to read the game really well. Admittedly, I've only seen him a few times. I'm kind of relying on what I've looked at on the likes of White Scouts and sorts and clips wise, but he seems to read the game really well. Really strong in duels, both on the floor and in the air. But also seems to be fairly good technically as well. Quite press resistant, good in tight spaces. A little bit of a kind of full package, so it's easy to see why a top club like Liverpool would be interested. Just whether, I don't know, Josh, were you leading on to the point of whether you thought he was the right profile for Liverpool?
No, I think my thing was more, I just tend to rule out these players when they come on the scene purely because of price and because of competition for the player. So I see the player's name, I see heavy links to Chelsea, Real Madrid, Manchester United, Bayern Munich, and I just think Liverpool will go a little bit more under the radar, get a player who's going to cost half the amount. But then when the link emerged, I did think about it and thought, hang on a minute. I thought Liverpool quite clearly need investments in midfield, I think, more than anything else. And it's probably a case of now you can probably put a fair bit of money into your midfield now because, we went a few seasons on what we've currently got. We did lose Wijnaldum. I know that we kind of replaced him with Thiago, but Thiago's not on the pitch that often. He's also, I think, 30 himself. And whenever Liverpool get to this point, we got to that point with the defence. We spent loads on Van Dijk. We got to that point with the goalkeeper, spent loads on Alisson. I don't think Tchouaméni will cost as much as those players because his contract runs out. I think this summer he'll have 2 years on his contract. So that suggests that this summer you could possibly get him for a decent price. I think the only worry I'd have would be if the likes of United are going for him and they just blow it out the water with a daft price, kind of like Chelsea did with us with Timo Werner. But that's the reason I ruled it out. But then when I actually looked at the player, it just made tons of sense. I thought because if you used to look at what Liverpool have lacked this season, the reason maybe Liverpool aren't going to win the league, I would look at not good enough defensively and not enough control in the midfield relating to the defence. I think the actual back five is fine. Well, the back six, really, including Fabinho, I think is fine. But I don't think they've had enough protection. So if you look at what Tchouaméni offers, he'd offer new midfielder, ever-present, defensively elite. So I think if you look at it from an analytics perspective, which is perhaps what Liverpool have done, he is kind of the answer on his own, really, isn't he, when you think about it?
Yeah, he is. From a profile point of view, definitely. It's I can see you concern a little bit about when other clubs get involved, it becomes a little bit more messy. But I don't know, it feels like, we're not talking about an Erling Haaland, are we? We're not talking about a player who's kind of got the whole of Europe watching him. I have no doubt he'll be on the radars from top clubs. Well, you mentioned a couple actually, Chelsea, Real Madrid. A few have been interested, but there's a part of me that thinks Liverpool would have more success against those clubs for a player like him, as opposed to maybe like a Werner, or I'll use Haaland as the example again. A kind of out and out forward where a lot of fans are kind of really excited about it. I think midfielders can drift under the radar a little bit more, but I could see it happening. Liverpool have obviously recruited from there before. Fabinho come from there, didn't he? That's where they brought him in from, and obviously he proved to be a success. He could be as well. The only thing I'm just thinking now, based on what we were just saying about him, how do you think that would change Liverpool's kind of midfield structure, or do you kind of see him going as like an 8 or something? Because obviously at the moment he's more of a plays in like a double pivot pretty much most of the time, doesn't he?
Yeah.
So do you see a change in Liverpool's starting 11 if he come in?
I'm not too sure on that one. He's currently very much in the mould of Fabinho and what Fabinho was doing at Monaco when Liverpool signed him. He was part of a double pivot, and he was, I suppose, the more defensive of the two at the time. I think with Bakayoko. Tchouaméni is part of it too as well. And if Liverpool sign him, I don't think he'd come in and remove Fabinho as the team's number 6. So I think if he did sign, he would either change Liverpool's midfield makeup to a 2 and Liverpool maybe move towards a 4-2-3-1, or he would be Wijnaldum's long-term replacement as the left side of number 8. Because Wijnaldum, more often than not, I know this goes against his reputation, but Wijnaldum, more often than not, did not get forward. He didn't get into the box and things like that. That was a situational tactic with Wijnaldum. More often than not, he stayed behind the ball, stopped counter-attacks, provided kind of like a balance to the team, offered protection, and basically let others shine. So I think Tchouaméni has a well-rounded skill set enough to do that personally. And I feel like we've been tipping Liverpool to potentially switch towards a 4-2-3-1 for years, but it just doesn't seem to be happening.
No.
I mean, I suppose this could offer it, but at the same time, where then would where would Henderson play and Harvey Elliott? Harvey Elliott's quite clearly an 8 in Klopp's mind. So I'm not sure. I think I see Liverpool staying in the 4-3-3 and Tchouaméni playing on the left if he arrived.
Yeah. Yeah, you're probably right. But I suppose it just adds a little bit more versatility to the way you can settle. And the thing is, 4-3-3, 4-2-3-1, they're not actually a million miles away from each other in terms of, where profiles line up and things. They're fairly similar. But yeah, I just wonder if when you first come in, if you will kind of be looking at the opportunity to go a little bit more of that 4-2-3-1 and then having that extra play forward maybe. There's options there, and that isn't necessarily a bad thing, is it? Because it's very rare, especially for Liverpool to play so often, that you kind of have your elite players available every single week without the need to make the odd change or adjustment. So I think having that option to go to bringing him in alongside for being able to be an asset initially, and then obviously you're thinking long term, maybe a replacement.
Yeah, because I do think this season Liverpool have kind of been a little bit overload in terms of all out attack, like just relentless attacking. And I think it's kind of got a little bit too much at times, and Liverpool have suffered a little bit. I think City get a tiny bit more balanced than Liverpool, and I think bringing in Tchouaméni, although he's not particularly nature in his nature to be a very attacking, I think Liverpool can do with that balance at the minute. And if you look at his numbers, as I said, he is defensively elite. I sent a newsletter out on it last week. Those who signed up will already be aware of this, but I'm just going to have a look at the numbers. So last season, in Europe's top 5 leagues, players who, well, no, I didn't even use this actually. I did totals, so just no peer 90 stuff. I did just pure totals, and Tchouaméni was top of Europe's top 5 leagues for tackles and interceptions combined, with a total of 206. He was joint top with somebody else, and roughly near the top as well. You've got players like Yves Bissouma and Declan Rice and players like that. And the reason I didn't use pair 90 numbers, I used totals, is because the reason we use pair 90 numbers usually is so that players don't benefit from playing too many minutes. But in this case, considering Liverpool's issues this season, they have played. They have struggled when it comes to getting players on the pitch. So I thought with Tchouaméni, I'll do it as totals because it proves he's on the pitch all the time. And I'll look at his defensive numbers, and his defensive numbers defensive numbers can be a little bit unreliable at times and things like that. But I think just on the basics, he looks absolute, 99th percentile basically.
Yeah, sorry, mate. I was just smiling to myself throughout the whole thing because apologies to anyone who's listening and not watching, but I disappeared as Josh was talking into the sunshine that was coming through my window.
I was talking to a silhouette there for
yeah. I was going to say stop the recording, but I thought, you know what, it's something to make people laugh, isn't it? But yeah, I was trying to casually pull the blinds down while nodding along to what you were saying there. So I think I've sorted it anyway. But yeah, it tickled me that. But sorry, going back to the point. Yeah, he looks really strong. He looks really strong for them. I think he's definitely, his future's going to lie away from Monaco. You touched on that kind of coming up to that 2-year window. When contracts due to expire in 2 years, and that's where I imagine, Monaco officials will start be sounding out his officials to be like, look, obviously there's going to be an extension coming. If he's not going to sign it, then we probably need to know so we can make some money on him. So, we're talking a play theoretically could be available as soon as this summer. I think that would be a really good time for Liverpool to get him in based on what we've seen this season.
Yeah, just a little bit more on his availability. He did start 36 of Monaco's 38 League One matches last season, which obviously bodes well in terms of Liverpool's current issues. And so far this season, he's featured in every single league game except the one which he was suspended because of too many yellow cards. And recently, he actually captained Monaco. It was only a one-off game, so I'm not exactly sure what happened with that. But the fact he's being captained at the age of 21 does offer an insight into his character. Obviously, Liverpool focus a lot on that, but rightly so as well. So I do think he seems to make a lot of sense. And as I said initially, I was a bit like no chance. But then once I thought more about it, and I just thought, if he's Liverpool's top man, if he's Liverpool's main target, and he's let Tchouaméni know and things like that, maybe Liverpool will get him, and maybe we'll get him for a reasonable price of, I don't know, 40, 50 million potentially. But as an individual player, he does seem highly suited to solving, in my opinion, exactly what Liverpool have suffered from this season.
Yeah, I'd agree, to be honest. There's actually not much more I can say on that. I do agree. I think if you're looking for the profile, young, really strong on both areas of the game, and what is a kind of pivotal area of the pitch, a really congested area, and to be able to break down opposition attacks really well, and then kind of, we haven't touched on it that much, but technically he is strong, Josh, isn't he? He can kind of not only break opposition attacks down, but he can launch them the other way. So he's a player to really like. I guess that, again, just to repeat, the only worry would be, if potentially other clubs being interested, that could be enough to put Liverpool off if they didn't want to get in some sort of bidding war.
One question I do have for you, Dave, is obviously in comparison to some other midfielders Liverpool have been linked with, namely, I suggested Youri Tielemans fairly recently. There's plenty of calls for Jude Bellingham. In Tchouaméni's case, I think he's got bags of potential, easily the same amongst the potential as those two, in my opinion. I mean, Bellingham's maybe slightly higher, but I think it's interesting that Liverpool have been linked with Tchouaméni rather than Bellingham, because if you look at what, again, go back to what Liverpool have suffered from this season specifically, in my opinion, it has been on the defensive side and it has been in midfield. Tchouaméni, in my opinion, slightly addresses that more so than Bellingham, who, in my opinion, is a bit more offensive. And I said before, Liverpool have been a bit overload this season. So, and Bellingham has another year on his contract in comparison to Tchouaméni. So I don't think it's necessarily a fight that Liverpool are making a decision between. But in comparison between the two, do you think Liverpool would be right to go for Tchouaméni, especially considering what they've suffered from this season?
I think based on the environment Liverpool is at the moment, yeah, probably. I also think there's a wider problem with Bellingham in that he is so highly sought after. Understandable why, because he's a kind of an elite teenager. I think with Bellingham there's always going to be a little bit of baggage, and just to be clear, I don't think as a result of his own actions or behaviours or anything like that. I just feel like, being young, English, kind of a bit of a prodigy. I think there's always going to be that spotlight on him. I think he probably is suited to playing a little bit more of an expansive game. Just these little things. And I think for that reason, Liverpool may prefer to not go there and instead go down this route instead. It is just my opinion, just a guess. It's hard to say, isn't it? But I think there would be some logic behind that decision.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be an interesting one to see if it develops towards the start of the summer and things like that. But if Liverpool are going to sign that player, I'd expect us to find out about it well before the summer, to be honest. Similar to Canate, and the way I remember Fabinho, I think, was bought something like the day after the Champions League final a few years ago. And I think if this one was to happen, I think Liverpool would get him in pretty early. But in terms of the next talking point, mate, we're going to touch on again, because there seems to be, more and more quotes coming out about it lately. Another little chat about Salah's contract. I mean, it's a bit of a minefield. We're going to have to be careful. But have you got any thoughts, any new thoughts on some of the comments that have been made? And has your expectation that a deal will happen changed? Where you currently at regarding whether it'll happen or not?
So if I had to put it on a kind of spectrum or kind of a gauge, something like that, can't think of the right term, I'd probably go with the 60-40 at this present moment in favour of him not signing a deal.
Okay.
which probably won't make many happy. But I don't know. I just find some of the quotes strange, and I think it's really difficult because it is in many ways a bit of a game, isn't it? It's a bit of a game of words, and it's a negotiation. So it's not playing your full hand, keeping cards close to your chest to get all that. But just some of the things he says recently, we're mainly talking about this, aren't we, because of the interview that come out in GQ, or is coming out in the February edition. That's right, isn't it, Josh?
Yeah, alongside Klopp's comments as well, saying like there's nothing to worry about and things like that. And
So for me, I just think I know there's a lot of moving parts in these deals. I know it's very messy, but I think there's also an element of I'm really careful to say this, but there's also an element for me of if you really want the deal and you really want to stay, then you just stay. And I appreciate that he's trying to get his value, and he sees the best players in the world on X, and he believes he should then be on that X figure. But I don't know if you're really saying how much you love the club, you want to stay, etc., then you just sign. You sign, and that's it. I know it's really messy. I'm not naive. I get there's a lot to it, but I'm just making the point that if you really, really wanted to stay, you could stay. There's clearly an offer on the table there, but it's just deemed that for whatever reason he and his representatives want more, or they won't sign.
Well, that's one of the reasons why I have a bit of hope that it might happen. Purely because if you look at it, really, Liverpool seems to want it to happen. Salah seems to want it to happen, and I think Liverpool are actually in a very, very strong position regarding this, because before addressing Salah's contract, Liverpool went and tied down basically everybody else. Trent, Alisson, Fabinho, Van Dijk, they all agreed to stay, and none of them asked for above 250 a week, I think. So Salah's well aware of that, and then in addition to that, there's kind of no way for him to go, really. Bayern Munich and Real Madrid, Real Madrid and Barcelona, I don't think will entertain Salah personally. I think Real Madrid in particular are more interested in Kylian Mbappe. And I just can't see him at Barcelona for whatever reason. I don't think they can afford him anyway. Bayern Munich don't tend to do deals like this. I don't think he would go to an English rival. So it leaves PSG. PSG is it. And considering what Salah is, interested in playing for the biggest honours and things like that, I'm not sure Salah would have too much of an interest in playing in League One. Maybe I'm wrong there, but I think considering all that, I do think Liverpool are in a really strong position regarding it. And you said there that if Salah wants it to happen, it kind of can just happen. And I would not be surprised if Liverpool kind of put on a bit of a poker face and just, I don't know if wait it out is the right way of putting it, but put it out there that, like, listen, you can stay, you can absolutely stay, but we can't pay you that amount that you're asking for, but you have every reason to stay, and where you're going to go if you don't, type thing. I'm not sure what you think about that one.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the club's position probably gets stronger the time it goes on. Again, guesswork, but I probably imagine that representatives are maybe feeling out other clubs across Europe, the big names. And as you said there, who actually signs them? We know the just for convenience, we'll call them El Clasico 2. We know they probably can't. As you said, Bayern don't really do that. Don't think they'd be interested in that. Bayern's recruitment is really good. I don't think can't think of many examples of Bayern buying a player really at the very, very peak of his game across Europe. I'm thinking, like, I know they've took the likes of Lewandowski off Dortmund and things, but I can't think of Bayern really, really doing that. Correct me if maybe Robin or someone, but it doesn't feel the same.
I don't know if Sane is at his. How old Sane? Sane went there at age 24 or something, so I don't think
Yeah,
he
but
would
even
be in
that
the same
felt.
bracket as
Yeah,
Salah.
he still felt a little bit younger, didn't he, with like his best years to come and things. So
Yeah.
yeah, so it is only PSG who can certainly afford it. At PSG will always struggle because even though it's probably a little bit unfair at times, Ligue 1 doesn't have the same appeal, as like a Premier League or La Liga. So it basically just be to win the Champions League, which I'm sure he wants to win a few more times, but he has done it. It's not as if it's the one thing missing off his kind of trophy cabinet. So I think what I'm saying is basically as the months go on and maybe the options begin to dwindle, there is a chance, I think, that his representatives think, okay, well, we haven't really got the pick of Europe that we thought, and maybe we are just better staying, here. And I do expect Liverpool will probably increase at that stage just to get the deal done, and maybe it gets done. I don't know. It's still hard. I'm still weirdly, I don't know why, it's 60-40. Maybe that doesn't, but it wouldn't surprise me if it did, which is why I'm not committing any further than a little 60-40 split.
Yeah, like, on Liverpool's strong hand, I think Sam Wallace did a piece recently in the Telegraph, and one of the lines from it was, Salah is running out of ways to convince Liverpool to pay him the price that he believes he deserves. And I think people, certainly on Twitter, seem to interpret that the wrong way. I think people interpreted that as like, I mean, do FSG really need to be convinced that Salah's a good player? That's not. I think what he was getting at. I think it was more a case of he's running out of ways to convince Liverpool to pay him daft amounts. Well, not necessarily daft amounts in a European context, but in the Liverpool context, he's kind of asking for double what all his teammates are on. And I don't think Liverpool are in as much of a tricky position to just kind of, roll over and pay him. I think they are in a very strong position. Salah doesn't really have many other options to kind of flirt with as a means of making Liverpool a bit fearful of losing them type thing. So
I think
I
just on that
go on.
point, Josh, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was going to say on that point, I think 10 years ago, this would have been a different thing. If we were here 10 years ago, even if Liverpool were as good as they are now, I think the market was different then. We think of the way Real Madrid come in and took Ronaldo from United, which I think has got more parallels than maybe any more recent transfers. Ronaldo was at the top of his game, cost a lot of money to get him. Real Madrid still come in and took him. I think if we were in that environment now or that market, then I'd say Liverpool a little bit more vulnerable, but it's just changed so much over the last 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, I mean, as far as I'm aware, Liverpool's highest earner is on about 220 a week. And I think, reports suggest that Salah's asking for 4. Now, I am pretty confident now in saying that Liverpool will not pay him that. I don't think Liverpool will pay him that. So if he's going to stick with that, if that's his price, that's his value, that's what he thinks he's worth, fine. I don't disagree in the European context. Players like Jadon Sancho are on about 350 at United, I think. Salah is deserving of that, no doubt. But at Liverpool, the club will not pay him that. And he must know the club are not going to pay him double Van Dijk, Fabinho, Trent, Alisson, Robertson. You've got world class players all over Liverpool, and I don't doubt that Salah is probably the best of them. But Salah's not, in my opinion, twice as valuable as Van Dijk. He's just not. Not in my opinion anyway. Maybe I don't know. Is that a controversial opinion, mate? Or
Well, I'm sure people will tell you soon after the show goes out, mate.
yeah, I mean, but
I see the point you're making. I think attackers always have a little bit more
yeah,
value in the eyes of people, don't they? But in the context of this team, if you look at the difference Van Dijk and Alisson made, even when Salah was at the team, the difference they made in terms of turning Liverpool into an actual team of winners, basically. Then I think your point's spot on.
yeah. I just think you mentioned about 60-40 there. I think for me, I am absolute split. I am absolute bang 50-50 at the minute. And the main reason I doubt it is because of his reported request for 400 grand a week. As I said, I think he's worth it in a European context. But at Liverpool, he's not going to get that. He really is not going to get it. And if he's really, really stubborn with it, I don't think a deal will happen. If he comes down to 300, maybe a bit different. But and I think Liverpool's strength, Liverpool's hand in this moment is, I think the club probably hopeful that he will come down a bit. But it's an interesting one. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. It's one to watch, mate.
Yeah. I think this will rumble on this one, sadly.
Well, just out of interest, before we move on, I mean, I'm opening up a little a grenade here, I think. But before we move on, if in the summer he hasn't yet agreed a new deal, PSG lose Mbappe, and to replace Mbappe, they come to Liverpool and offer 100 million. What are you doing?
I am personally selling at that moment because I think you only have to look at what's happened at United with Pogba. You know, Pogba was potentially maybe not 100 million, but what do you reckon Pogba could have went for, Josh, a year or two ago?
Probably what United paid, maybe, for him.
So what was that about? 80?
Around 80, potentially 50 to 80 or something like that.
Yeah, so you could have got that, and United are going to lose Pogba definitely this summer for nothing. And I don't think Salah would sign a contract in those final 12 months. It's either in these next 6 months or I think not going to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, what would you
do? I do think usually once a player enters his final 12 months, you don't usually see deals happen that often. So it would depend on what Liverpool can do with the money and things like that. Like, obviously, the final year that Wijnaldum had at Liverpool, Liverpool deemed him to just be worth keeping and letting go for free rather than cashing in on him. But I think if 100 million bid comes in for a player who's going to leave for free in 12 months, as good as he is, you know, Liverpool probably have to consider what he can do with that money, which is probably a lot. But I don't know. As I said, it's going to be a really interesting one to see how it plays out, and I'm sure this won't be the last conversation we have about it. So, yeah, just moving forward then, looking ahead to the weekend, because we are still going to talk about upcoming games, of course. Liverpool have Crystal Palace in the second Premier League game that Liverpool have played in a row without Mane and Salah on the pitch. And I think from a Palace perspective, I just think it's quite apt, maybe at the time, that Palace represents a club at the minute that did undergo a overhaul in the summer. And he kind of did it in one summer, really. You know, if you look at the players that he lost, I was looking before, he lost Van Aanholt, Townsend, Sakho, McCarthy, Cahill, Scott Dan, Wayne Hennessy in goal. All of them, of course, left on a free. So a little tiny bit different to the situation at Liverpool. But they then brought in players like Mark Gahey, Anderson, Edward, Elise, Will Hughes. And he kind of did undergo a real change-up, a real freshening up over the course of one summer window. And I think, obviously, there's been a lot of pressure on Liverpool, particularly during the pandemic, to freshen things up. Liverpool have waited. But I think this could be the summer where Liverpool maybe do it. And I think Palace, you know, our opponents this weekend, offer a bit of an insight into how to do it, really. Not that Liverpool should be taking inspiration from Palace necessarily, but I do think they navigated it quite well.
Yeah, but why not? You know, why not? It's not as if you're saying you base your model on Palace, but why not take inspiration from a club who's done something quite well? You know, I mean, let's have a look at it. 2019-20 average age for the season. You know, theirs was the oldest in the league, 31.3. Come down slightly to 30.2, but still the oldest in the league as of last season. You know, this season there's now 5 teams who've got an older average age, and theirs is about 27 or something. So they've done really well in terms of bringing it down. Specifically this year, I thought they recruited really well. some really exciting players. And, they were actually really unlucky, weren't they, Josh, with those injuries at the start of the season. Eze was one, wasn't he? He obviously picked up a big one. And Thingy from Reading as well. I'm sure he picked up an injury, didn't he?
Leash.
Yeah, he did, didn't he? I'm not making that up.
I think he might have, yeah, I'm not sure. I know he's been playing more of a part lately, though.
Yeah, well, either way, they recruited really well. A little bit unlucky with some of the more marquee signings, but they've done really well. And as I said, I think maybe you can look at them and think that's a little bit how you do it. Obviously, Liverpool are operating at a higher level to be targeting better players. But hats off to Palace, they've done well. Not just terms in recruitment, but they've also brought in a pretty a coach with a more kind of modern philosophy in Vieira, who's done fairly well.
Yeah, I mean, just going through those players that I've just mentioned before, in terms of Guehi, Anderson, Edouard, Elise, and Hughes. So you've got aged 26, 19, 23, 25, and 21. And I suppose you could throw in Conor Gallagher in there as well on loan, age 21. So Palace really freshened it up this summer. And he got rid of loads of players who've kind of been around there for ages. And if you look at Liverpool's squad at the minute, I think we do have a few of those players who've kind of, I suppose, been done in Anfield. They've probably hit the ceiling type thing. So I think Milner's contract expires at the end of the summer. You have Firmino's contract expiring at the end of next season. Mane, I think, his contract expires at the end of next season. You've got players floating about the squad such as Oxlade-Chamberlain, Naby Keita. I think I'm not sure how Liverpool will navigate his future. Basically, Minamino, I'm not sure about what the club will do with him. Origi. So I do think there's a big option for Liverpool to really attack this summer, like they did a few years ago when they signed, I think, Fabinho and Alisson and Shaqiri in the same summer. I think Liverpool might do another one of them this time around, and it's going to be interesting to see how the club navigates and how much they spend and who stays and who goes type thing. Because obviously we've just been speaking a lot about Salah and his contract, but because of Salah's contract situation, no one's really talking about the fact that Mane and Firmino both haven't had an offer yet, but they're both due to leave in 18 months. And if Salah doesn't sign, you could potentially have the whole front three leaving at the same time, unless there's a way of getting around it.
Yeah. How many of them do you think they'll look to replace? So the reason I asked, so I look at, say, Jota coming in, and you think, probably a Mane replacement,
Yeah.
Probably a Mane replacement. So you're all right there.
I think Liverpool are going to keep the 4-3-3 personally, and I think the plan moving forward is going to be for Jota to play in as Mane, Salah to stay as Salah, and a more goal-orientated version of Firmino to play through the middle. So, say for example, Salah on the right, Jota on the left, and say a Jonathan David through the middle. I think that's kind of like Liverpool's plan for the next attack. I know Jota's played through the middle mostly since he arrived, but I do think Jota will move out to be a bit more of a wide forward. And I think Liverpool will sign, a striker type, although they are kind of hard to identify, to be honest. But I think that's Liverpool's plan for the next attack. But it's obviously very open as to whether that will happen, because Salah has to sign and Liverpool have to get the targets. And I think Liverpool are open really as to what happens there, because if Salah's not signing, you then have to get in a left-footed forward, really, such as Rafinha maybe, such as Jarrod Bowen maybe. Whereas if Salah stays, I think you can probably rule out Rafinha. So it's really interesting as to what will happen moving forward, because it feels like a very fluid situation.
I wonder how much is in the bank as well. And how big the kitty is. Well, there's a few positions, isn't there?
Yeah, but I really do think that Liverpool over the course of the pandemic have been more than any other club concerned about the pandemic, to the extent that now, kind of moving out of it, I do think Liverpool will have, cash reserves there to use. But then at the
Yeah,
same time, Liverpool's business has always kind of been, we sell what we earn, we sell what we make in the transfer market in terms of sales. So we buy what we sell. So I'm not sure how much deadwood maybe that Liverpool will be able to get rid of, and the funds Liverpool will be able to make. That's why the whole Salah question before 100 million PSG, it has to be a question, because in terms of reinvestment, we know how good Liverpool have reinvested funds in the past in terms of Phil Coutinho and stuff. So it's as I said, it's an interesting one.
and the thing on Salah as well, right? That we didn't really touch on, and nobody really wants to kind of acknowledge it because he's like so much, and he's probably at his very best right now. He's at his absolute peak. But it still doesn't change the fact that he is 30 in the summer as well. That's a reality, and you say you put him in the brackets of your Messi's, Ronaldo's, who go on and continue to perform at elite levels, into the early 30s, but not even even the very best. It wasn't as straightforward as them just ticking over season after season. Sorry, adjustments had to be made. If you look at Ronaldo, the way he changed from being a kind of wide attacker to basically just an out-and-out goal scorer through the middle. Barcelona had to make a ton of allowances for Messi, predominantly, not really giving him any responsibility without the ball. It isn't straightforward to keep those very top players at the very best without all these kind of infrastructures behind them when they get on the wrong side of 30.
Well, that's a good point, because what the point I've just made in terms of Liverpool's next attack, I wrote a piece fairly recently actually, saying that the situation is so fluid that I think no matter what Jota ends up on in the Mane role, I think that's a given. But I think if Salah stays, obviously you have to consider that he's getting on now. He's maybe less suited to getting up and down the flanks all day. So potentially Salah becomes the Firmino replacement through the middle, and maybe Salah spends the majority of his next contract as a striker for Liverpool, and then maybe you can look at getting Rafinha in, because then you need that left-footed wide player. Then Rafinha would make sense, and Bowen would make sense. So in a situation like that, if that's the plan for Salah moving forward, you almost have a coin flip as to whether you go and sign a Jonathan David type who's going to play through the middle and put Salah on the right, or a Rafinha type who's going to play in Salah's role and Salah's going to move into the middle. So again, it's just a super fluid situation, and we're talking, it's total guesswork really, isn't it? But I suppose these are the conversations Liverpool have to have behind the scenes.
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, I think we'll round up there. Keeping with the theme of the new season, so do let us know what you think of maybe the new setup or whatever. Hopefully you enjoy it. Dave, thanks for joining us, mate.
Yeah, thank you, mate, and cheers, everyone.
Yeah, and we will be back next week to talk about more interesting Liverpool talking points, and if there's bigger games coming up, I know the Champions League's on the verge of returning, we'll spend a bit more time actually previewing them. But yeah, we'll see you next week, and thanks for tuning in.